at BNet. Together with our local channel partner, Microsmith, we are fully committed to the success of the OpenLMS user community, extending the unmatched Moodle resources and knowledge from OpenLMS to support educators in the Philippines. We will be talking about the emergent transition from online learning to limited face-to-face in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic here in our country. And joining me today is Dr. Dave Marcial, Director of SOUL, Silliman Online University Learning at Silliman University, and the President of the OpenLMS user community in the Philippines. We also have Mark Bailye, Senior Director, Global Customer Success at OpenLMS, who will be giving us significant updates and sharing the approaches to support limited face-to-face classes during these difficult times. And of course, our guest speaker, Assistant Professor Cherylle Ramos, who will be formally introduced by Dave. While there is still a conundrum between limited face-to-face and online learning, that is here our speaker's fresh perspective on how education institutions realize the full potential of students' learning during this pandemic. And for those of you just joining us, welcome. A little housekeeping before we get started. First, a recorded version of this webinar will be accessible through the link that will be sent by email to all attendees when available. Next, to limit the potential for distraction and background noise, mics for participants are turned off. We'll be running a live Q&A at the end of the presentation, and mics will be turned on then. We have a chat box enabled for all participants. So if you like to ask questions to Mark or Cherylle or Dave, please do so. Just pop them in there. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will collect these and address them during the Q&A session. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording of today's webinar. So let's get excited for this opportunity to listen to our three speakers engaged in real time as they share their stories and ideas. Let us turn over the time to Dr. Dave Marcial. Thanks for joining us today, Dave.
Thank you, Sheila, and hello world. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who attended our second virtual engagement with the Open LMS. For today, for this session, we will be talking about a hot topic as we prepared for the next school year. But before that, let me acknowledge our participants here. Thanks to all of you for coming. To all who chatted, good morning, everyone. To Dr. Earl Albina from LPU, good morning. To Jail, hi Jail. It's nice to see you here. And to Dr. Devi Galang and to the rest of the online friends and friends in person and in both digital or online environment. Maayong buntag from Dumaguete City. In this unprecedented time, many of us teachers are challenged perhaps every day, every time we wake up. I know many of us are thinking on how we could improve our teaching strategy as we face online learning challenges. The Philippine Commission on Higher Education um, a chair cited that the flexible learning is the new normal, and to many institutions like our institutions, our way of flexibility is the use of digital and online mechanisms. Some degree programs in the Philippines were allowed to perform face to face in a limited mode, specifically the allied health sciences. And just recently, the Commission cited that the next in line to be processed for unlimited face to face are engineering and information technology. I think you will all agree with me that our full online learning delivery has just started or has just taken up. I mean, maybe some of you can say, like, our e-learning curve has perhaps on its way and to be shortened. But hola, here comes another pedagogy that we have to learn new things, and that is the limited face to face and the so called blended learning. Today, we are organizing our second leg of views or virtual engagement and workshop series by the Open LMS community, the Philippines chapter. Specifically today, we will have an enriching discussions about transitioning from our full online delivery to limited face-to-face. And we are happy, together with us today, we invited two of the most celebrated and highly engaged to online learning. I would like to introduce, as mentioned by Sheila, Mark Bailye is highly regarded throughout Australia and internationally as a thought leader in technology enhanced learning and as a trusted advisor. Twice awarded by Blackboard as Customer Success Advocate International of the Year in 2018 and 2014. Let's welcome Mark Bailye, the Senior Director, Global Customer Success at Open LMS. Our second guest for this morning is the Director of the Educational Technology Center and faculty member of the Department of Secondary Education of the University of Santo Tomas. She is currently the president of the Philippine E-Learning Society, and she specializes in leading a massive e-learning implementation. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to all of you our panelists and guest speakers for this morning, Mr. Mark and Assistant Professor Ana Cherylle M. Ramos. Friends, Mark and Cheryl, can you join me in the screen now? Yes, thank you, Mark. And may I see if Cheryl is also switching on her video? Hi, Cheryl.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
Hi. Hi. Okay. So, before we will start with our discussion, may I ask our guest here a just to contextualize our definition of limited face-to-face or blended learning in your based on your experience, how we could define blended learning. Like, what if a 5-year-old kid will ask you what is a blended learning? Who, Cheryl?
Can you hear me? Right?
Yes, yes, we
Yes.
can hear you.
Okay. So in plain language, when you say blended, it means that you're mixing something, correct? So when you say that you're mixing something, it could be that you're mixing the mode of delivery, the delivery methods. So you can be mixing both your synchronous and asynchronous instructional delivery strategies. The reason for mixing is because you want to blend the best of both worlds, knowing that you have diverse set of students that need to be accommodated, and that you need to be as inclusive as possible. That's why you need to have the best of both worlds.
Thank you, Cheryl. That is, I totally agree, and I saw Mark also nodding. The basically the when we say blended, as mentioned by Cheryl, is there is a mix, especially in this time that the commission is allowing us to do a face to face. Why we do blended? Because we can blend the face to face component and the online part. And as we all know, also there are many strategies and there are many models which I am excited to ask from our panelists on the different approaches. But I think Mark has prepared something for us to be enlightened the different models, the different approaches of limited face to face, and maybe after Mark, we can tackle also on how we could implement this, the more specific and an injection also from the experience of the University of Santo Tomas from Mr. Ramos. Mark?
Sure. Absolutely. So I've just got a few slides to support this. So let me just share my screen. So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes, we are
Yep.
seeing your screen. Please go ahead.
Great. So essentially what I want to do is, and in fact, probably skip over the context because you've done such a great job in terms of positioning what we're currently seeing in the education sector at the moment, as we've all gone from face to face to completely online. So I'm going to set some context around that, talk a little about the challenges and what we're seeing around trying to support a limited face to face. And I'm going to talk a little bit about 𝗩𝗴𝗴𝗀𝗪, which is one of these new learning modalities that's been around for a while, but it's certainly got a lot of people talking about how to do that. So as you mentioned, and as we've seen over this period, we've sort of gone from the beginning of last year, where a lot of us were doing pretty much all our teaching face to face. And then there was this rapid transition to fully online, and it was like almost a emergency course transitions that we all went to as we all went to a fully online approach, as suddenly our students couldn't attend our institutions. And then probably towards the end of last year, we really focused on how we could improve that online delivery. So now when we come to this year, we're thinking, what does this actual new norm look like? And as we're emerging out of this period, there's this need to be able to come up with learning modalities that support limited face-to-face. And we're seeing that being discussed in a lot of institutions in terms of how we do that. And of course, there's these really three areas that institutions are now thinking about. Is we don't see anytime soon that we're going to go back to a complete face-to-face model. So it means, how do we adapt to this new norm? And doesn't mean that we don't need to adapt, but now we really need to redefine and innovate. So when we're talking about supporting limited face-to-face, that's really where we are at the moment. And some of the challenges with that, as already has been identified in the discussion just prior to this, is we're thinking about how do we make sure that the learning that we're provided can be accessed by all students. And so making sure that the learning we're providing really does in fact clear a path for everyone. So ensuring that the learning provided, whatever form that takes, that it means that all students can access it. And so what it means is institutions are thinking about, we need to redesign our courses with the intention of helping every student. And that's really been the challenge as institutions think about that. What's the best approach we take? How do we support that limited face-to-face approach, and ensuring that we're helping all students in the process? And so a lot of people are really thinking about, as they're moving to support limited face-to-face, their accessibility strategy. Some are in initiation phases, some are in the establishing or moving well, in terms of they're putting in places approaches to ensure all students, whether they are attending limited face-to-face, online, blended, can access the learning and learn together. And so that's where this challenge comes with what modality do we use? As we said, you know, face-to-face, it requires synchronous. It requires a location. When we go to online, we know both of those things aren't necessarily required, and it requires a web only. But again, it's talking about accessibility in regions where access to the web could be difficult. And so then we're talking about blended or hybrid type models that people have now been focused on for quite some time. But as people were now really focusing on that supported or limited face-to-face, what we're now seeing is this idea around HighFlex learning, which is a combination of hybrid and flexible learning. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the hybrid approach. So for those that may not be familiar with what HighFlex is, it's really an instructional approach. It combines face-to-face and online learning. And what it means is we're now starting to think about how each session that we're providing can be offered not just in person, i.e. in the classroom face-to-face, but how is it also offered synchronously online as well as asynchronously online as well? Because what we're now moving to is this idea that students can decide themselves how to participate. What that means is we're giving student choices about how they participate in the learning. What's going to be most convenient to them? What approach is really going to aid their learning progress? Maybe it's around social interaction preferences. But taking this approach also provides challenges for institutions and teachers to deliver this type of model. And so what we see institutions looking at as they're supporting limited face-to-face is this idea that we have a teacher in a classroom with students. Or do we have the teacher online with students as well as students in the classroom? Or do we have a synchronous instruction and participation? And important to all this is the technology. Important to all this is where Open LMS fits in helping you support this model of learning that really supports limited face-to-face. And so this is the area that we're being involved in a lot of the discussions currently. So as I said, it requires us to rethink, and it sounds like this is also happening in the Philippines, where we got to draw on how we did things in face-to-face. What were those key pedagogical approaches that we use that we know are tried and true and work really, really well? We need to think about how we move to real-time online teaching, and how do we draw on the best of those practices to support this hybrid flexibility model. The main challenge is, how do we get our students actively involved? how do we ensure our students are engaged and actively learning when we're moving with this type of approach? And the key to that is the technology. It's how we put our courses together, and it's certainly the pedagogy and the engagement around that. And obviously it needs all those things to work well to provide that really good learning experience that enables our students to be actively involved, to be engaged and learning. So when we think about that, there's really 4 fundamental values around this type of approach, which you can think about. The first one is learner choices, which means a learner can choose what mode is going to suit them. So sometimes they might decide that, hey, I've got access to the classroom, so I'm going to be in the physical classroom. Or one week that might not be appropriate and I can join synchronously to that discussion, or that may not be so easy to do, so I'm going to study asynchronously. So you've got those choices that students can make. The key one, I think, is this second one, which is whatever way we're providing learning activities, we need to make sure that it's the same for all our students, and it enables all students to meet the learning outcomes. What that means is we need to give thought around usability of assets that we create, or artifacts, whether they be content, learning activities, assessment tasks. We need to think about how we make sure all students have access to those. And obviously the LMS is a good place to house and enable really good access. And then fourthly, we really got to think about the accessibility. How do we ensure that our students have the technology, have the skills to participate in these different modes of learning? So that's what we're currently seeing. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the backwards by design. So what it means is when we're thinking about this new hybrid flexibility mode of learning, there are really 3 things we need to think about as teachers. How do we provide content? How do we evaluate learning? And how do we engage our students in this new model? And so I'm just going to talk briefly about that. So if we think about assessment, for example, and we've got these 3 things. So what do we do in the classroom? Well, we need to think about how we, in the classroom, if it's an informal assessment task, how do we do that? How do we present the content? How do we get our students engaged? Similarly, if we're doing that where students are logging in and synchronously participating in this informal activity, how do we ensure that the instructor, if they're in the classroom, engages with this online community? How do they interact? How do they also support that informal assessment process during the content and presentation stage? And then if students aren't attending either of those, how do we support that asynchronously online? How do we provide students feedback? How do we do it in a timely manner? How do we do it accurately? And whether that's recording some of what's happening in the classroom and online asynchronously, maybe there's other ways and tools that we use to engage our students asynchronously online. So when we think about assessment, there are things that we need to think about to ensure that we cover off those 3 areas to again support this limited face-to-face. Secondly, if we're thinking about learning activities and we're having meaningful discussions in the classroom, maybe we've got students divided into groups, maybe they're working on activities that the instructor's leading. How do we bring in that group of students that are online and also trying to synchronously learn? How does the instructor engage them in the conversations with those who are present in the classroom? How do we get them involved in group challenges, activities, etc.? And similar for those that can't attend those, what happens on online asynchronously? How do students there see that the teacher is actively involved, that they're participating in the discussions, etc.? So again, a few ideas to think about as we try and combat this limited face-to-face. And then thirdly, with content, obviously in the classroom, really easy to dynamically present content to students. Again, online, how do we get those students involved and addressed in the same manner as those students that are in the classroom? And similarly, how does that content also get given to those that are synchronously online? For example, is it recorders? Is it recorded messages? Advising those students what they need to do, so they get that personalized learning experience as well. And so we see with assessment, learning activities and content, there are in fact things that we need to think about to ensure that we're giving access to all students, whether they decide to come into the classroom face to face, but we know that's limited. So it then means we've got to focus on these other two areas around online synchronous and online asynchronous, and what those activities look like. So just the final thing, and this is really the key challenge. Firstly, it's not easy to do this, but what we need to think about is how do we provide the same learning outcomes and provide the same meaningful learning opportunities for all students as we think about how do we successfully implement a form of learning that supports limited face-to-face. And that's why I'm really excited about what we're discussing here. I know there's a lot of questions that have been put forward. And so hopefully that really sets the scene to answering a lot of these questions, and really keen to see what institutions are doing as they're supporting this limited face-to-face. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. That's a wonderful and amazing walkthrough of what's a limited face-to-face. I totally agree with you, and let me quote you that achieving a meaningful learning experience in this kind of modality is not easy. But what is important is we can prepare our content, our assessment, by following the different core values, which for me also is very difficult. No, it's really very difficult. Which the common goal of this is basically total engagement with the students. And I think the question, because after hearing Mark, Mark actually gave us a walkthrough and the entire landscape of the limited face-to-face, aka blended learning. I think my question, and I wanted to shoot this question to our friend from the University of Santo Tomas, who has a very well experience in terms of integrating digital technology. Um, Citing also from the slides of Mark, it's the most challenging phase perhaps is the preparation, the rethinking part, the redesigning part. Like for a X school, which has no experience into a limited face-to-face and just experience at least a year of full online learning as a flexible learning mode, what should we done? Like, I wanted to know or hear what should be done first, the second, the third, so that we'll be guided, because Mark presented so many things to do and many challenges that trigger us, that and we can say that, oh my god, what's this commission higher education, this is another headache. We're not yet really taking off our full online, and now here comes that limited face to face. Cheryl, can you share with us or give us input, perhaps based on your experience and research, what should school X should do in rethinking or redesigning from from their mode of delivery of 2020 to 2021, switching to 2021 2022?
I like that Mark was able to made my my part of this answer easier, because he has laid down the micro component part, which is on the perspective of the teacher. Because he was able to talk about redesigning your instruction in such a way that you apply high flex mode of learning, because that's the way to go given of our situation. But as well as I also would want to for you to see the perspective of an entire institution, because when you are in an institution, you are not alone. You will be dealing with administrators. You are not just a teacher teaching a certain subject. You need to make sure that whatever you redesign inside your own course is aligned with the program outcomes and in the university outcomes, and in effect will later achieve the graduate attributes, making sure that your graduates are really different from the rest of the students in the world. At the same time, you ready them for the future. I think that is something we should not forget when we try to redesign in a micro view. So if let me check if I'm able to show something. Are you able to see something on my screen there? Just beside my face. Is it showing? Okay, so let me now make this bigger for you, or you can change a bit of your setting in Zoom by just highlighting the speaker so that my screen would be bigger. Okay. So I think some of you will have attended like some sessions in Teaching and Learning Asia. This is something I presented there before. Um, I just want to highlight that Mark mentioned the micro view a while ago. That is actually very good, especially if you are an instructor. But if you are an administrator, for example, you need to see a macro view perspective of outcomes-based education, and that you should not depart from it when you redesign in the level of the micro view. So with the macro view, as I've mentioned, that you have a set of graduate attributes that you want to develop from your students, and that attributes must be well defined in the different courses or the different programs in the different courses, as well as in the different subjects. And that's why you have the course intended learning outcomes that must be in place. Once it is very clear to you, especially let's say you have engineering courses that have a lot of skills based type of training, that gives you now a way to think that I have to redesign this in the high flex mode of learning. And that's why Mark said you need to redesign using, let's say, a backward design um, a model. So you need to take a look at your course intended learning outcomes. What do I want my students to learn? What do I know about my students? And that's as well, you anchor the kind of assessment that is needed. So if it's these are engineering students, you have to target the nearness to realism as much as possible, because the objective types of assessment cannot actually measure, let's say, the skills in the course if it's, purely objective. So you need to combine now your performance-based assessment in the design of your assessment methods. And of course, it has to be supported by the right mix of your TLAs, your teaching learning activities. And that was well explained by Mark a while ago. At the same time, of course, when you design content, it has as well be able to address. You have to be inclusive, because you have diverse set of students. When they are out there, they may probably have, different problems when it comes to their technology devices or their access to the internet. So that's why when you redesign the content, then the type of materials that you develop must also be aligned as well. Like, do you need to show videos and yet they have problems with bandwidth? So those are some of your considerations when you design it. Now, when it comes to your assessment, we need, of course, to be familiarized with the different types of assessment, like what are some of the formative strategies that I will do in class, um, taking into consideration your synchronous and asynchronous strategies, as well as with the summative, especially if these are high stakes exams. And we know that, of course, we can deter cheating if you have, put high premium on performance based assessment, especially if it's a skills based type of a course. And once you're done with that, I think the next thing is you have to lay it down sequentially so that it will be structured well in your lesson, especially it's going to be placed in a learning management system. So I like that OpenLMS has the learning path. Am I correct with this, Mark? OpenLMS is the learning path, and that is actually very good in terms of structuring your lesson, starting from engaging your learner down, of course, to this time enhancing retention and transfer. As you can see from the first two columns, you have the teacher-centric approach. There's nothing wrong if that is the kind of the design wherein you lay down the sequence. So that's your Gagnes, you have the Hunters, instructional technology in practice model. Then you have the Bailye's and the design thinking. So those are student centric. So they are very good in designing the sequence for, let's say, an art class, okay, or an engineering. I'm sorry. Let me take one more example. Could be in an architecture type of class wherein they do prototyping of like some concept. So as you can see in between that, that's where your assessment would come in. That's your assessment for learning. That will be your formative, and then of course your assessment of learning there would be your summative, and usually at the end of the session. So those are some of the things I would want to share and add to Sir Mark's talk just a while ago.
Thank you, Cheryl. When you present all those diagrams, my impression is, oh my God, better I did not ask that question. But anyway, we have to ask that kind of question because what I am trying to say is, while we are so happy that we can do limited face to face, it is actually at the back end into that is it is another challenge on how we can prepare us, our content, our assessment, our resources for that kind of modality. Mark also mentioned about, I think, and I feel that the most challenging preparation that we could do from the shift also is on the usability of the content. Why? Because there are groups of learners that might choose, or depending on your modality, during the face-to-face part and during the online part. So what are the things that, shall we say, we should prepare, at least the basic preparation in making our resources? Let's say, for example, our PPT, our PowerPoint, our video, or at least a PowerPoint, what should be done in such a way that it could cater and to have a value, a usability value in the diverse strategy like HiFlex or in the limited face-to-face? Mark?
Wow, what a loaded question. So I think with any of the things that we create, is, to me, it's almost like, how do you do it once without creating duplication? So if you think that you've got people that are in the classroom, online, whichever mode it is, synchronous or asynchronous, like you said, if you're putting a PowerPoint together, you obviously wouldn't print it out and give it to the people in the room. You put it in a learning management system for people to access. Again, when you're thinking about those that aren't in the classroom, how do you express that content in the PowerPoint? Do you record yourself and do little micro sessions around what it is? And if you put it online, it's also going to help those that are in the classroom, because they can also go back and revisit the information, as well as ask questions. So some of the things I would think about is what you put on the PowerPoint. To me, it makes sense to sort of have that learning management system as a source of truth, where students, regardless of where they're coming from, can go in and access the content. It's also the area where students submit and undertake assessment tasks where possible. So again, as a teacher, you've got one place that you're going to track assessment and performance of students, because the last thing you want to do is create an assessment task, whether it's low stakes or medium stakes or high stakes, where you're doing it in different modes and you're creating a lot of work administratively for the teacher to be able to mark, for example. And similarly when it comes to resources as well. Cherylle might have some other ideas that she's doing practically as well.
Okay, if I could just share as well,
Please.
just maybe two frameworks that could guide us when it comes to producing materials. So maybe we'll start with a PowerPoint that you already have, and then how are you able to do that, redesign it so that you can deploy it in the right environment. And the reason for asking yourself, what will I do with an existing PowerPoint that probably I've been using for a long time in a face-to-face classroom, right? So that is something we consider, or we're thinking right now. So I think this is a very um, known model. So the UDL, so Universal Design for Learning. So it says there that you need to be as exclusive as you can when it comes to your learners, and as well with the presentation of the materials, correct? Because in one of that, let me just make this big for you. Because you want your students to succeed and give them that equal opportunity in your class. So there's a need for you to meet them inside the class. So one particular that it has an effect on would be the design of your instructional materials, because it says there that we need to present information and content in different ways. So for example, I have a PowerPoint. And then I'm going to deliver that in a synchronous mode like this. So it's easier because you will just share screen. What about if it's in asynchronous, wherein you're not there? So it means to say I would probably be recording myself, maybe on a small screen, and then you have the PowerPoint just beside it. Or can I just give, a PDF copy of my presentation, right? Is that the right thing to do? Just give them a PDF version without any support, without any scaffolding, an explanation is missing. Is that the right thing to do in an online environment? So here comes the second framework that I want to share. This is what we call the bandwidth immediacy matrix. So let me just make this big for you. So Dale Stanford developed this framework, which suggests that when we develop materials, we need to consider whether students are having a low bandwidth or students will be using low bandwidth technologies, or there is a sense of immediacy that is needed when I deploy the material. So it says here that it is not suggested to have synchronous instruction all the time, right? Because we have problems with internet in the Philippines. So you need, when you design the material, you need to consider the situation of your students. Because at the end of, the recipient condition is more important. So even if you have a very flashy type of, let's say, material, but it's difficult for them to watch a video, then probably a PDF version with some text as a support would be better, rather than streaming a video where nobody could watch. So that is just my takeaway on this. When it comes to designing the material, you have to be you have to match it with the audience that you have, including the resources of the teacher as well as the resources of your students, with inclusivity, of course, as your main anchor. So if you have the competency and you want to be as exclusive, so if let's say I have a PowerPoint, I would create several versions of it in my class. So my LMS has no limit in the type of content that I could upload. So let's say I have one topic, I have 5 versions, for example, of my material. This is just a recording of my voice. This is the video and the PowerPoint together, that you can use asynchronously. And if you can attend my live class, then you attend a Zoom meeting, for example. Or here's the handout for all of this. So you need to have that patience to
Thank
be
you,
as
Cheryl. And
inclusive. Yeah.
I when you were mentioning that, Mark and I were actually smiling because I think others also will be scared. Oh my God, it's so difficult to prepare one material, and now you are mentioning 5 different formats. That is
We
why
do that as well. Yeah.
I highlighted on usability, because usability of the content really affects student engagement, both content and even in the assessment will follow when a student is engaged to content. It Research shows that it follows that they are engaged with the assessment. Now, that's basically talks about platforms, tools, infrastructure. I think I will not end discussion without questioning this again in this universal question in the Philippines, about internet connectivity. I think people will be sad if I will not ask this question. How can we apply, modify, revise, whatever verb which is appropriate, a limited face-to-face in a place, in a barangay or an institution where internet connectivity is always a challenge. I'm not sure if Mark can relate this, but for sure, based on his research, you can relate this. Mark, can you?
Yeah, sure. Pre-COVID, I happened to be in Fiji, in the Pacific Islands there, where I think the internet challenges are very similar to the Philippines, where they're broadband is in less than 5–10% of households, so they are relying on mobile devices to access the learning. So what we need to think about, and I think a lot of Cherylle's comments were really important, where we want students to engage online or watch videos. Like, we're not putting up massive videos, where we've got to think about how we chunk the information so students can get it. And certainly one of the areas that Open LMS is focused on is around mobile app support, particularly for download. So what that means is students can connect to an institution, they can update their mobile device with the information they need, and then go away and work on that as required. It means it's a more asynchronous approach, but again, we can prepare our material to support that really well. So we give students opportunities to think about a scenario and how do they apply the learning to demonstrate that they've understood the key concepts. And then when they come online, that's synced, and they give an opportunity to discuss that with peers and review. So I think as we look at the technologies where accessibility with even devices or internet is a challenge, we need to think about, again, how we're creating these resources and be able to do it effectively.
Yeah, I get a private message actually. The model presented by Miss Ramos is very nice, no? Especially the second model. Would it mean, because we have a very limited bandwidth, would it mean that we only choose the email or those kind of technology?
Because we are after flexibility to meet your students' needs, correct? So if the situation calls for you need to use the lowest bandwidth, the lowest immediacy strategies for delivering instruction, then that could be the best solution at that situation. That is why at some point, if you've seen the DepEd's implementation, if it's just the book and the written self-learning modules, the printed learning modules are enough, and that you think it's the best for your students, so the simplest tools could be the best solution. So not necessarily you have technology there, like online technology.
Thank you very much, and I hope that answers to those who opted to be anonymous. I would like also to ask our audience here to please leave your questions, and I hope I was able to get all of those, and I think Pearl is also monitoring the questions. While we are waiting for the questions, we still have time. Let's take this opportunity to ask. Prior to this webinar, we tried to survey some of our partners in the Open LMS community, and I would like to pick up on how more on the how do we differentiate synchronous learning in a full online versus a limited face-to-face? Questions like, is it possible that a group of students will opt to be in a face-to-face because we are not allowed by our parents to come on campus, but we are allowed to do I mean in at home. What kind of pedagogy perhaps in the classroom, like a teacher is discussing and how we make sure that during synchronous learning they have the same level of learning, the same level of understanding from the two different modality. Because the context of my question is the limited face to face is not compulsory. It's up to students who would want to go to the university. So the challenge is actually more on the administration of the classroom. Perhaps like in a 30 students in a class, 15 of them will come to the school and 15 of them will be at home. What is the best strategy to deliver content synchronously? Cheryl?
So from an e-learning practitioner, the best way to deliver that mode, if you have a learning management platform, because you can do your face-to-face instruction just like the old way, but you have like 50% of your class online. So you can easily manage that if you have, an environment, a face-to-face environment and an online environment at the same time. So there is this caveat in a sense that the teacher must be able to prepare two sets of variation in the design, because you have, your face-to-face mode of instruction, and then you have the ones online. So you have to design the version that would fit that online environment, those students in that particular environment at the same time. Because those two would have two delivery modes. Remember, you have, active engagement because you are there physically with the students. But how can you translate an active engagement online? That is, of course, different. There is a variation in the design of in the strategies that you have to choose side by side, so that at the end the outcomes will be met.
So I totally agree, and I hope our friends here in the academy are seeing now the real score. As I'd mentioned, while we are so happy to have the limited face to face, at the same time, the demands, especially on the preparation factor, is also increasing. Take note of the keyword from our e-learning specialist: a variations, and a variations entail a lot of time to devote in order for the preparation, the redesigning, the rethinking part. And that is only the preparation part. I
Sir
mean,
Dave,
that's
sorry, I
yes,
have
yes.
to add one more.
Sure, sure.
One
Please go ahead.
solution is you should have team teaching for one subject. One is for you're teaching the same subject, both of you. Let's say you, Dave, and myself. So Sir Dave will be our face-to-face instructor, while myself could be the one in charge of the online lesson. So
Wow, that's a very good
yes,
sharing.
I'm just redesigning the Sir Dave's face-to-face, strategies online. So we own the subject together, but it deloads us of, doing two things at the same time, because we are now two instead of one. Yeah.
That will also lead me the while we are shifting to limited face to face, that also entails a change in the administration in terms of operation of the loading, operation of the time spent to the teacher. And I agree, I think there are many administrators here. I received also a question about how to do the loading if this kind of group will do face to face. And then my take to that is, please go back to your implementing guidelines, please go back to whatever policy you will have. I think what I could add also is, while we are capacitating our teachers in the classroom, there should be a solid plan also in terms of the operational strategy and activities of the implementation of the limited face-to-face. Our commission just gave us the things to do and to prepare, and it's up to the universities on how we are going to translate those policies and guidelines from the Commission on Higher Education, because there's a lot of issues, concerns here, especially on the engagement of the teacher to the face to face and engagement to the teacher to the online. And I like the idea of having the team teaching collaboration. After all, we have technology, we have platform that can bind us together. Since Mr. Ramos mentioned about team teaching and variations, that will also lead me to pick up the question here. What about the grading system? Any suggestion? Can we say that one grading system should be followed in the variety of modality that I delivered? If Cheryl is teaching the face-to-face and I am online, can I use the same grading system? Or can we both
Definitely.
use the same grading system?
I think
Definitely.
yeah.
Go ahead, Mark.
Please go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say absolutely. I mean, because then you otherwise you get back and you're starting to create different ways of grading the same thing. So I agree. I think it's the same. What could become more of a challenge administrating is if you happen to mark attendance. What does that look like? Whether it's face to face, online, or synchronous. If you've got some need to mark how well people are attending sessions and things, which I know some institutions do, others don't.
Cheryl, do you have something to add?
I agree with Mark on the attendance policy. How many sessions you should be there when you are online, when you are in the face-to-face. You just have to specify that in your what you call course guide. Um, because you are after the same outcome and you've redesigned your course to follow the same content, but what you have is just a variation of the teaching strategies because we have two learning environments, then I think we still need to share the same grading scheme. um, and as well as there could just probably variations in terms of some distribution of points, but that could be well explained by teachers talking to each other. That this, let's say we put high premium on this kind of assessment because it is the one needed to achieve the outcome. And so what is the variation in face-to-face? What is the variation online? Um, and if you can meet halfway, because at the end, it's just one grade that the student will see, right? And what is important is actually not the score, but what they have learned in the course. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think regardless of the modality, whether full online or limited face-to-face, as mentioned by Cheryl, is let us go back to the intention of the program, the outcomes of the program. In the Philippines, we are very familiar with the outcomes-based education. I remember last year I was asked, is outcomes-based education can be implemented or integrated in online distance learning? Totally yes, because that online learning is just a modality. After all, we always go back to the outcomes of the subject, the course, and then leading towards the achievement of the institutional graduate outcomes. Cheryl and Mark, it's so nice to be with you and discuss more. But I take this opportunity as an eye opener to all of us that there is so much things to do, but I'm not threatening everyone here. And I wanted to pick up what Cheryl is saying, that team working is the best ingredient, perhaps. Teamwork, collaboration, in the micro and the macro level. Discuss this with your colleague. Discuss this to our administrators, to our heads, to our supervisors, instructional designers, our assessment experts, and all those stakeholders that will help us, just like what we experienced last year when we started jumping off to the full online learning. To summarize in my own interpretation from our two distinguished guests here, we have a lot of theories. We have a lot of frameworks available, but these are, it's up to us on how we are going to contextualize all this, and this is not compulsory. We are very much given we are given the freedom to redefine it, what is appropriate, what is available resources into us. And I always tell this, that digital technology is only an aid. What is very important is our content and our objective. I hope our content and our objective is not being driven by the technology, but instead our technology is driven by our content. Because I am talking here content driven by a technology, and Cheryl is mentioning about the common ground to meet the face-to-face and the offline people, or the online, having an LMS. I think it is also right to ask Open LMS, perhaps Mark, what is the roadmap? What are the strategies of Open LMS to help Philippine higher education institutions in going through the limited face-to-face, perhaps some updates from the Open LMS community. Mark?
Sure. So certainly from a platform perspective, as you'll be aware, there'll be a product update coming up on the, I think it gets rolled out to sandboxes on the 10th of June and then to production sites on the 8th of July. That's when the next major upgrade occurs. But what I'm also excited to tell you, I can't necessarily pinpoint a launch date, but I've been working on, with my team, creating an Open LMS Academy, which I think is going to be of real benefit for teachers, for LMS admins. So we've got different tracks around how do you configure, and from an LMS admin perspective, how do you configure and maintain Open LMS to support learning and teaching? So we're developing a lot of courses and content around that. More importantly, on the teacher side, we're doing the same thing. So how do you build courses? When you're thinking about assessment, what options are available, and starting to think about these different learning modes. And again, how can you maximize Open LMS to support these different practices? And I'm hoping that some of that won't be too far away. And in probably within the next 2 months, we'll be able to launch that, and you'll be able to access some of that content, which you can also share across your faculty. So for us, that's an exciting thing that's coming. And I think that'll really touch on a lot of these issues like this that have been brought up today, that there's no reason why we can't help you by creating some of these courses, maybe in partnership with people like Cherylle. So there is some credibility around what we're putting together, or you, Dave, get you involved, and we can create those and again really work on this as a community and get best practice. So that's, to me, that's the most exciting thing coming up. But yes, we are doing the upgrades.
Thank you, Mark. But someone is so fast to text me. Is it free?
Some of it will be, and some of it will be an engagement. And what we're looking at doing is providing some badges and some certifications to say, look, these are the skills that you need to be able to teach online effectively. So it will be a combination.
Thank you, Mark. we are excited for that academy, and we hope to learn and to partner with you, with other universities, and because that there's that's a very good avenue for us to learn. Sometimes in this kind of crisis, teamwork, collaboration is, I think, very, very important. And in relation to learning new things, it's so wonderful to have no less than the president of the Philippine E-Learning Society to give us updates also to the e-learning community. After all, I'm sure this president in the e-learning is the most busiest president perhaps of the organization, because online learning, digital technology is actually perhaps on her back. Cheryl, any updates from the Philippine E-Learning Society?
Yes, I would like to take this opportunity to for you to attend the National E-Learning Conference. So please visit pelsconference.org, and you can register here. Also would like to inform everyone here that Sir Mark will be having his talk on June 5 for the certification workshop, and Sir Dave and I think a lot of their faculty members from Silliman will have parallel sessions on May 29. That's actually tomorrow. So we are excited because it is the first time that we will also be doing our immersive exhibit hall. So you can actually interact with all our sponsors. And of course, there is interactivity. As you can see, you can, in fact, chat or, email and interact with some of the content. So this is also the very first in the Philippines of an organization who does this kind of an event. So we of course would like for you to take part of this of this conference. That's actually tomorrow. There's still plenty of time for you to register and be recognized as an e-learning professional in the Philippines. So good afternoon, good morning, still good morning to
Thank
everyone.
you, thank you, kapatid. Thank you,
Thank
Cheryl.
you,
Cheryl is a
Dave.
good friend of mine from, of course, from the Philippine E-Learning Society and other organization that we are also advocating on the digital resource. Thank you for that. And I personally excited to attend of course, I'm always excited to attend e-learning conference, but this time, because of the innovation, because of that immersive, another word again, no, ladies and gentlemen, immersive digital platform, as if we are attending the conference, and how we can translate the physical conference environment conducive to learning new things, especially for a topic like research and all those parallel presentations. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for all our participants on here inside our Zoom venue. And I would like to thank this opportunity for a call of collaboration, perhaps, to the Open LMS community. The Open LMS community is open to all our friends and network of Open LMS. If you have further questions, you can actually drop also some email messages to all of us. And I hope um, you will continue to attend our future engagement. So once again, this is Dave Marcial from Silliman University, Dumaguete City. Thank you for joining with us. And I turn over the screen to our host, Sheila Christine Ledesma.
Okay, isn't it amazing, Dave, if you have friends, great friends who are e-learning enthusiasts, advocates, and experts? I am just really so thrilled. But thank you again, Anna, Cheryl, and Mark, and of course to you, Dave. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar, Emergent Transition from Online Learning to Limited Face-to-Face in the Context of the COVID-19 Pandemic in the Philippines. fantastic presentations from our e-learning advocates and experts. So thank you for emphasizing both practical and theoretical alternative ways, also university-wide teaching and learning pedagogy that can be used to enable our students in the Philippines to realize the full potential of e-learning. So if you have any other questions, please contact us, Cherylle, Mark, and Dave. Please share your email IDs, just in case there are other, questions on hand. And on behalf of Open LMS and Open LMS user community and our presenters, I thank you for joining us today and have a great rest of the day. And thank God it's Friday. Thank you.
𝗏